It was supposed to be an ordinary afternoon in our quiet neighborhood, but things took a turn that no one saw coming. The Homeowners Association, better known as the HOA, has been pressuring us for weeks to join, sending letters and making constant visits. Most people just gave in to avoid the drama, but my daughter stood firm. She wasn't about to be bullied into paying fees or following rules that didn't even make sense. What she didn't realize was that standing her ground would push one particular neighbor, someone we all knew as HOA Karen, to a shocking extreme. Karen had always been the loudest voice at the meetings, the type who thought she owned the entire street. She would patrol the block, nitpicking over lawns, mailboxes, and even the color of curtains. But when my daughter politely refused to join the HOA, Karen's attitude shifted from pushy to downright threatening. On that day, instead of words, she tried to intimidate in a way no one expected. Neighbors watched in disbelief, frozen, as the situation spiraled out of control right there in our driveway. What Karen didn't know, and what made this moment even more unreal, was that my daughter wasn't just any young woman standing up for herself. Beneath her calm and collected presence was a real law enforcement officer. She had kept that part of her life quiet in the neighborhood, never flaunting her badge or using her position for influence. To everyone else, she looked like just another homeowner. But in that tense moment, with the entire block holding its breath, the truth was about to come out in a way that would leave Karen and the whole neighborhood absolutely stunned. And that's where everything changed. Neighbors whispered for months about Karen's behavior, but most people brushed it off as her just being difficult. She had a way of making everyone feel like she was in charge, even though she wasn't elected by anyone. If your grass was too long, she'd leave a note. If your trash bins weren't lined up perfectly, she'd knock on your door. She thrived on control, and when someone didn't bend to her demands, she saw it as a personal attack. That's exactly why my daughter's refusal to join the HOA rattled her so much. It wasn't about the rules. It was about Karen losing her grip on power. What Karen didn't realize was that my daughter had faced far bigger challenges in her line of duty than a neighbor with a loud voice. She had spent years learning how to stay calm under pressure, how to read people, and how to act when the stakes were high. But in our neighborhood, she kept all of that hidden. She wanted a quiet home life, away from the weight of her badge, where she could just be a daughter, a friend, and a neighbor. So when Karen singled her out, the rest of the block only saw two women at odds, one demanding control, the other refusing to give in. The tension grew each day. Karen's visits became more frequent, her tone sharper, her comments louder so that others could hear. Some neighbors avoided getting involved, while others secretly admired my daughter for standing her ground. But no one could have guessed just how far Karen was willing to go to prove her point on that day in the driveway. When Karen crossed the line, everything people thought they knew about both women was about to unravel in the most unexpected way. The days leading up to that moment were filled with unease, almost like the whole neighborhood was holding its breath. Every morning, Karen made sure to walk past our house, glancing at the driveway as if she was daring my daughter to respond. Some neighbors tried to brush it off as drama, but others could feel something bigger brewing. Even the kids on the block noticed the tension, whispering that Karen was out to get anyone who didn't follow her rules. What started as a simple disagreement about joining the HOA had turned into a battle over respect, pride, and control. Behind the scenes, more layers of conflict began to show. A few homeowners privately confessed that they, too, had been pressured by Karen but were too afraid to speak up. She had a history of filing complaints with the city for the smallest things: peeling paint, slightly crooked fence, even cars parked a few inches too close to the curb. For years, she ruled through fear of fines and embarrassment. My daughter's defiance wasn't just about refusing to pay dues. It was about standing up against years of quiet bullying that no one else had dared to challenge. Meanwhile, Karen's allies within the HOA board were watching closely. They whispered about making an example out of my daughter to discourage others from resisting. What they didn't know was that word of Karen's behavior had already spread further than they realized, and some neighbors were beginning to quietly question why they were allowing one person to dictate so much of their lives. The neighborhood had become a stage, with everyone waiting to see who would back down first. But when Karen escalated her intimidation, she had no idea that the person she was targeting was more prepared than anyone imagined. The neighborhood had never felt so divided. Some families began avoiding the street altogether, driving the long way around just to escape the drama. Others stood at their windows, quietly watching as if the daily standoff outside our home had turned into its own form of entertainment. Every move Karen made seemed louder, bolder, as though she wanted the entire block to witness her control. She would shout about HOA rules from the sidewalk, claiming my daughter was breaking the community's harmony, her voice echoing against the houses. Each word was designed to corner her, to make her bend, but my daughter never flinched. Behind her calm expression, though, I could tell she was calculating every step, weighing not only her safety, but the safety of everyone around. Her training had taught her to de-escalate, but it had also taught her when someone had crossed a line too far. And with each passing day, Karen pushed harder, trying to provoke a reaction she could twist in her favor. The air on our street felt charged, like a storm was about to break. The tension reached a boiling point one evening when neighbors gathered in small clusters outside, pretending to chat, but really waiting for the confrontation they sensed was coming. Karen marched straight into our driveway, her words sharper than ever, her voice carrying across the block. Some whispered nervously, others pulled out phones, recording in case things got out of hand. Everyone knew something was about to snap, but no one dared to intervene. And then, in that moment, the block went silent. Karen made her move, louder and more aggressive than ever before, her eyes locked on my daughter. The entire neighborhood held its breath, seconds away from witnessing a truth that would change everything. Just when it seemed the tension had reached its peak, another layer of the conflict revealed itself, one no one in the neighborhood could have predicted. As Karen's voice echoed across the block, one of her closest allies from the HOA board stepped forward from the crowd. Instead of calming the situation, he added fuel to the fire, loudly backing her up and accusing my daughter of setting a bad example for the community. His words weren't just meant for her, they were meant for every neighbor listening. A final push to rally support against the one person brave enough to stand her ground. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Some neighbors looked uneasy, others whispered among themselves, but no one dared to interrupt. What they didn't know was that this particular board member had his own reasons for siding with Karen. He wasn't just protecting her authority. He was protecting secrets about the HOA itself. Rumors of misused funds and shady dealings had floated around for months, but no one had ever dared to question it out loud. By turning the spotlight on my daughter, they hoped to keep everyone distracted from what was really going on behind the scenes. My daughter, standing steady at the center of it all, recognized the tactic immediately. She could see the cracks forming, the nervous looks between neighbors who were suddenly realizing this wasn't just about lawn heights or trash cans. Something bigger was hidden under the surface, and Karen's aggression was only a mask for it. The shouting grew louder, the block buzzing with tension, when suddenly a new voice cut through the chaos, unexpected, firm, and impossible to ignore. All eyes turned toward the sound, and in that split second, the balance of power on the street shifted in a way no one saw coming. The voice that cut through the noise belonged to none other than the quietest neighbor on the block, an older gentleman who rarely spoke at all. Everyone turned in surprise as he stepped forward, holding a thick folder in his hands. His calm tone carried more weight than all of Karen's shouting. He revealed that he had been keeping records every complaint, every fine, every questionable dollar the HOA had collected. The moment he opened that folder, the crowd realized this was no longer just about a disagreement in the driveway. This was about exposing the truth. Karen froze, her confidence faltering for the first time. My daughter stood tall, her presence steady as the tension shifted away from her and onto the board. The neighbors leaned closer, whispers turning into open questions. Is that why our fees keep going up? Did they really spend money on that? What had started as a standoff over joining the HOA had now unraveled into a full-blown reckoning. That was when my daughter finally spoke, not as a neighbor, but as the sheriff she truly was. Calmly, she revealed her badge, her voice steady but firm, making it clear she had both the authority and the responsibility to act. The entire street gasped. Karen's face turned pale as the realization sank in. The very person she had been trying to intimidate now had the power to hold her accountable in ways she never imagined. But just as the neighbors thought the conflict had reached its end, the older gentleman added one last revelation: the HOA board hadn't just mishandled funds, they had been quietly breaking city ordinances themselves. Suddenly, the story wasn't just about Karen's bullying. It was about an entire system on the verge of collapsing. The neighborhood would never be the same. The block stood in stunned silence as everything came crashing down. The folder of evidence left no room for doubt, and with my daughter's badge now visible, the weight of truth was undeniable. Karen, who once barked orders at the neighborhood, had nothing left to say. The board member who had tried to defend her quietly slipped away, his face red with embarrassment. For the first time, the neighbors weren't afraid to speak up. They began sharing their own stories and fair fines, threats, and the constant stress of living under the HOA's control. What had once been whispers behind closed doors became an open conversation that united the community. My daughter didn't gloat or raise her voice. Instead, she calmly explained that there would be an official investigation into the HOA's actions. She reassured the neighbors that their concerns would be heard and that the days of being bullied into silence were over. It wasn't just about standing up to Karen anymore, it was about restoring fairness and peace to the entire neighborhood. For many, it felt like a weight had finally been lifted. In the weeks that followed, the HOA board faced consequences for their actions, and Karen lost the influence she once held. Some neighbors decided to dissolve the HOA altogether, while others worked to rebuild it into something more transparent and fair. The block, once divided by fear, slowly became closer than ever before. People waved more, talked more, and even laughed about how the neighborhood had once been run like a personal kingdom. Looking back, the story became more than just a clash with a difficult neighbor. It was a reminder that standing firm against intimidation can spark change, and that sometimes the quiet strength of one person is all it takes to give a whole community its voice back.